Welcome back to the deep dive. Today we're diving into a period back in 2018 when trade wars were uh, really dominating the
It
headlines.
was a pretty intense time.
It really was. And,
Yeah.
you sent us this fascinating article about Doug Casey. He's an investor and the author of Crisis Investing. And we're going to kind of unpack his perspective on what went down.
Sounds good.
So just to set the stage, it's 2018. The U.S., under President Trump, had just slapped these hefty tariffs on goods. 25% on things coming from Canada and Mexico, and 10% on stuff from China.
Yeah, and it's interesting how the situation unfolded. Even though the U.S. and Canada quickly agreed to sort of hit pause on those tariffs, Mexico got this month-long exemption.
Really?
Yeah, in exchange for providing troops at its southern border. So right away, you see this really complex interplay between economic policy and national security concerns.
Yeah, it's like every move has these ripple effects across the board.
Absolutely.
So the article really digs into this idea that tariffs, while often presented as a way to protect domestic industries, made in America and all
Yeah.
that, they can actually function as this hidden tax on consumers.
Yeah, Casey is very vocal about this point. He argues that tariffs might lead to higher prices on certain imported goods, but they don't actually cause inflation directly.
So it's not like a one-to-one relationship.
Exactly. He sees things like increasing the money supply as the real drivers of inflation.
So in that case, it would be more like, let's say you're a coffee lover.
Yeah.
You really like your imported coffee, and suddenly it's 25% more expensive because of those tariffs.
Ouch.
Right. That hits your wallet directly. But it doesn't necessarily mean we're seeing this widespread inflation across every single product and service.
It's a much more nuanced situation.
It really makes you think about where that extra money is going.
For sure. And the interview goes on to talk about how these tariffs could actually trigger job losses and economic slowdowns in countries like Canada and Mexico.
Which makes sense because their economies are so closely tied to trade with the U.S.
Exactly. It's like this domino effect. One economy weakens and those effects ripple outwards.
And hurting other economies could eventually backfire on the U.S. too, right? It's all interconnected in the end.
Absolutely. And Casey is especially critical of the impact on American consumers and businesses in the long run. He argues that these policies actually lower the standard of living in America and make the economy less stable.
So it's kind of like shooting yourself in the foot.
In a way, yes.
Now, the article goes beyond just the economic consequences, though. It also delves into this question of whether tariffs actually enhance national security, or if they're more about just posturing.
Yeah, this is where it gets interesting.
Right.
Casey takes a pretty bold stance.
Yeah.
He believes that true national security comes from strong economic relationships with other countries, not from isolating yourself with trade barriers.
So it's kind of the opposite of what a lot of people might think.
Exactly. He even suggests that cutting back on trade with China and Canada could weaken the U.S. dollar's position in the global market.
Wow, that's a big claim.
It is, and he doesn't stop there. He also brings up concerns about smuggling, how people might try to bypass those import taxes by creating these underground networks.
So we're talking about a whole black market popping up.
Exactly. It's a classic example of unintended consequences. You try to control one thing, and it creates all these other issues.
It makes you wonder if the benefits really outweigh the risks in these situations.
Right. And Casey also criticizes the U.S. education system in this context.
Oh, really? What does education have to do with all of this?
He sees the current education system as failing to prepare students with the practical skills and entrepreneurial mindset that they need to succeed in this rapidly changing economic environment.
So it's not just about tariffs and trade wars. It's about how we're equipping future generations to handle the challenges of a globalized world.
Exactly. It's about recognizing that the old ways of doing things might not be as effective as they used to be.
It's about adaptability, isn't it?
It is. And Casey is a big advocate for alternative paths to success, focusing on real-world skills and hands-on experience.
So with all this economic uncertainty, what are regular people supposed to do with their money? I mean, does Casey offer any guidance on that?
He does. He recommends investing in gold as a hedge against the declining value of currency, which is a pretty common strategy during uncertain times.
Yeah, gold is often seen as a safe haven.
Exactly. But what's interesting is that he also suggests looking at smaller resource companies, the ones involved in extracting essential natural resources.
So instead of going all in on big tech, he's saying, look for the companies that are producing the raw materials that everything else depends on.
Right. It's about recognizing the long-term value of those essential resources. He also cautions against overvalued tech stocks.
Because those high prices might not last forever.
Exactly. It's about looking beyond the hype and finding real underlying value.
So essentially, he's advocating for a more grounded approach to investing, one that focuses on tangible assets and the companies that control the resources we all need.
Exactly. It's a perspective that really challenges conventional thinking.
And that's what makes this whole conversation so fascinating. We're not just scratching the surface here. We're diving deep into how trade wars can impact everything, from the prices we see at the store, to national security, to the very foundation of the global economy.
It's about connecting the dots and seeing the bigger picture.
We're talking about potential shifts in global power, the rise of new economic models, even the future of education. It feels like we're at a pivotal moment in history.
It definitely highlights how interconnected we all are. What happens in one country can have huge ripple effects everywhere else.
And it shows how important it is to think critically, question our assumptions, and consider different points of view.
Absolutely. It's not about taking sides. It's about understanding how the world works and where our own choices fit into that bigger picture.
It's about realizing that there are no easy answers.
Right. And this conversation couldn't be more relevant today. As we face rapid technological advancements, shifting global alliances, and growing economic uncertainty, we need the knowledge and tools to make informed decisions.
Decisions that will not only affect our own lives, but also the world we're leaving for future generations. So as we continue this deep dive into the world of trade wars and their consequences, I'm curious to hear your thoughts.
I think what stands out to me is how economics isn't just about charts and graphs and abstract concepts. It's about real people, the choices they make, and the incredibly complex web of relationships that connects us all.
It's about the human stories behind the headlines.
Exactly.
And the impact of decisions that can sometimes feel very distant from our everyday lives.
It's about recognizing that we all have a role to play in shaping a better future.
And that's what the deep dive is all about. Encouraging you to explore, sparking your curiosity, and empowering you to become more informed and engaged citizens of the world.
It's about going beyond passively absorbing information and actively engaging with it, questioning it, and using it to understand the world around us.
And in a world that's overflowing with information that's more important than ever. So to all of our listeners out there, what's resonating with you? What new insights are you taking away from this deep dive so far? We'd love to hear your thoughts.
Because this isn't just about understanding trade wars. It's about understanding the forces that shape our world and our place within it.
It's about realizing that we're not just bystanders. We have the power to make choices that can create positive change.
Exactly. And that's a powerful message.
It is. And on that note, we'll leave you with this thought. If tariffs are a form of economic warfare, what are the alternatives?
That's a good question.
How can we create a global system that promotes cooperation, prosperity, and peace?
A lot to think about there.
Definitely food for thought as you continue your own deep dives into the complexities of our world.
For sure.
Thanks for joining us, and until next time, keep exploring, keep questioning, and keep learning.
See you next time. Yeah. It's about recognizing that we all have a part to play in building a better future.
It sounds like Casey is really pushing for a shift in our mindset,
Yeah.
both individually and as a global community. Before we move on, I wanted to touch on something else that Casey mentions in the interview that I found really thought-provoking.
Okay. What's that?
He talks about how tariffs could actually end up undermining national security.
Oh, that's interesting. He argues that real national security comes from having strong economic ties with other countries.
Not from isolating yourself with trade barriers.
Right. It's about collaboration, not isolation.
It really makes you question whether these kinds of policies are actually achieving what they set out to do.
He even goes so far as to suggest that reducing trade with major players like China and Canada could actually weaken the U.S. dollar's standing on the world stage.
That's a pretty bold claim, wouldn't you say? It really challenges a lot of the conventional wisdom around trade and national security. So for our listeners who might be feeling a bit overwhelmed by all of this, what are some key takeaways? What should they be paying attention to as these economic forces continue to unfold?
I think one of the most important takeaways is that economics isn't some abstract concept. It directly affects our everyday lives in very real ways.
It's not just numbers on a spreadsheet.
Exactly. From the prices we pay for groceries and gas to the job market to, how much money we have in our savings accounts.
It's about understanding how those bigger economic forces trickle down and influence our personal finances.
Right. And it's about making informed choices as consumers and as citizens.
So it's not just about understanding economics, it's about applying that understanding to our daily lives.
Exactly. And I think it's also crucial to remember that there are always multiple perspectives on these complex issues.
It's rarely black and white.
Exactly. What might seem like a straightforward solution can often have unintended consequences. We've talked about things like smuggling.
Right? Those ripple effects we were talking about earlier.
It's so important to think critically, question assumptions, and consider different points of view.
Casey's perspective definitely encourages us to rethink some of our assumptions about trade globalization and the role of government. Now, I know we've been focusing a lot on Casey's views, but I'm curious to hear your thoughts.
Sure.
What resonated most with you from his interview?
For me, it was his emphasis on adaptability and lifelong learning.
That's something we've talked about a lot on the show.
It is, and it's more relevant than ever in today's world. Things are constantly changing. We need to be able to adapt our skills and knowledge to stay ahead of the curve.
He's not just talking about formal education, is he?
No, he's talking about cultivating a mindset of continuous learning and being open to new ideas and opportunities.
It's about embracing the unknown and seeing change as a chance to grow.
Exactly.
I think that's a really powerful message. So as we start to wrap up this deep dive into trade wars and their impact, I'm wondering, what are some of the big questions we should be asking ourselves going forward?
That's a good question. I think one crucial question is, how can we build a global economic system that's more equitable and sustainable? One that benefits everyone, not just a select few.
It's about finding ways to cooperate and collaborate instead of resorting to economic warfare.
Exactly. And another important question is, how can we prepare ourselves and future generations for the challenges and opportunities of a rapidly changing world?
It's about equipping ourselves with the skills and knowledge to navigate a future that's full of uncertainty.
And it's about fostering a mindset of curiosity, resilience, and a willingness to embrace the unknown.
Those are some great points to ponder as we continue our own journeys of learning and discovery. So to our listeners, what stood out to you most from this deep dive? What new insights will you be taking away? We'd love to hear your thoughts. Because at the end of the day, this isn't just about understanding trade wars in isolation.
Right.
It's about understanding the forces that are shaping our world and where we fit into that larger picture.
It's about recognizing the interconnectedness of our global society and understanding the impact our choices have on one another.
And ultimately, it's about empowering ourselves to become more informed, more engaged, and more active participants in shaping the future we want to see.
That's what it's all about.
And that's the heart of the deep dive. So as we leave you with these thought-provoking questions, we encourage you to continue exploring, questioning, and learning. Thanks for joining us on this deep dive. Until next time, keep diving deeper, keep expanding your horizons, and keep seeking out new perspectives.
Yeah, it's about recognizing that we're all part of this interconnected global system.
And that our actions have consequences that go way beyond just ourselves. It's like a ripple effect.
Exactly. And we've covered a lot of ground in this deep dive, haven't we? I mean,
right.
from the nitty-gritty details of how tariffs work to their potential impact on global economies and even national security.
Yeah, it's been a pretty comprehensive look at this whole issue. We've really explored a lot of different angles, like the idea that tariffs might not even be that effective in protecting domestic industries, and that they could actually lead to unintended consequences like smuggling and even destabilizing economies.
Yeah, we saw how those ideas played out in the interview with Casey.
Exactly. And we also discussed Casey's thoughts on the U.S. education system and his argument that we need to put more emphasis on practical skills and adaptability. Preparing students for a world that's constantly changing.
Right, because those traditional models of education might not be cutting it anymore.
And of course, we touched on the importance of making informed decisions, as consumers and citizens, especially in a world that's becoming increasingly complex and interconnected.
It's about being aware of those bigger forces at play and understanding how they impact our lives.
So as we wrap up this deep dive, I wanted to leave you with one final thought from Casey that really stuck with me. He talks about the need for this kind of like paradigm shift and how we think about economics and globalization.
Oh, yeah, I remember that part. It's challenging some pretty fundamental assumptions.
He really does. He challenges that traditional view of economics as this zero-sum game, where if one country wins, another country automatically loses.
Right. It's like this us versus them mentality.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And instead, he proposes a more cooperative approach, one that recognizes that all countries have the potential to benefit from free trade and open markets.
So it's about moving away from protectionist policies and embracing a more global mindset.
Exactly. It's a pretty bold idea, and I think it's one that's worth really considering as we try to make sense of this 21st century economy.
especially with all the challenges and opportunities that are coming our way.
So for our listeners out there, what are your thoughts on this?
Mhm.
Do you think this kind of paradigm shift is possible? Is it even something we should be striving for?
It's a really big question.
It is. We'd love to hear your perspectives on this and all of the other ideas we've explored today.
Yeah, jump into the comments section and let us know what you're thinking.
Because at the end of the day, the whole point of the deep dive is to get these conversations started, to encourage you to think critically and to empower you to become more informed and engaged citizens of the world.
It's about giving you the tools and the knowledge to make sense of the complex forces that are shaping our world.
So keep exploring, keep questioning, and most importantly, keep learning.
That's the key.
Thanks for joining us on this deep dive into the world of trade wars and their impact. Until next time, keep your minds open and your curiosity alive.
And we'll see you back here for another deep dive soon.